Hey there, everybody. Q here with Project Nerd with another exciting interview from the Lions International Film Festival. This time, I am joined by filmmaker Maggie O'Dea, and we're going to talk about her film Keystone, which is showing at the festival. Hey, Maggie, how are you?
I'm amazing. Thank you so much for having me on, Q. This is just such a blessed opportunity, and thanks for this time together.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. It's always good to sit down, albeit digitally, with people anytime we're given the opportunity, right? Um,
Yeah.
Now, I have to ask, as a filmmaker, I mean, right out of the gate, let's talk. Doing digital film festivals has to be a little weird, right? Like, it's a little
Okay.
strange, maybe?
So, not to show all my cards from the beginning, but this is
Okay.
my first participation as a filmmaker in a film festival. So, I know no other way other than I used to live in Kona in Hawaii, and I frequented their ocean film festival every year.
Sure.
And so I'm used to it more from the spectator role than actually having the privilege of having a film involved. So I think there's so many benefits because it opens it up to everyone everywhere, right?
Sure. Yeah,
Instead of a
absolutely.
physical screening. So I think it's just like everything, there's pluses and minuses, but definitely networking, actually meeting people, that's hindered a bit, of course. Yeah.
Sure. Sure. Well, I completely understand that. That has to be a wild, well, even less so of a wild situation then, because since this is what you know, this is how film festivals go. This is a normal festival. Well, I'm excited to be a part of your press round for your very first festival entry. That's awesome. I'm so pumped to talk to you about this film. You sent us over the trailer. I watched it. I couldn't think of a more current and important topic. Would you mind speaking a little bit about what your film is about?
Yes, I will try to keep it to little because I'm
Sure.
so passionate about this topic and there's so much. But in a nutshell, um, it's always how far do you zoom out in the story, but basically in my search of kind of this place where economics and the environment meet,
Mhm.
finding that we're at this interesting place in our evolution where we haven't really been working with the earth in a synergistic way to create abundance as I see it. We've been
Sure.
going in from a very mental place and kind of using resources as we desire, but not thinking about what are the generational and larger ecosystem repercussions of our actions. So let me just take that right into this film of Keystone, which is really using this term keystone species. It's referring to keystone species, which in a keystone, in an archway, that middle stone is the keystone, right? Because it's the
Sure.
pressure point that's holding the arch together. So in an ecosystem, there are species that are that pressure point that, when removed, the ecosystem collapses, right? The arch collapses. And
Sure.
bison are that keystone species for the Western Plains. So we're talking west of the Missouri River, all the way to the Sierras, right? This
Wow.
huge area. Um, this brilliant man, John Wesley Powell, wrote about in the 100th meridian. So this 100th, what is that, longitudinal meridian or whatever, the rainfall, for whatever reason, drastically falls to only 30 inches a year. And this makes it a very unique environment because of the lack of rain, right? And
Sure.
we all know
Yeah.
plants need rain, right? That's like
Sure.
basic, right? And so, when when the bison, this keystone species, were basically systematically removed as an act of war and genocide against indigenous native people of the prairie, with that, so they were annihilated from over 40 million down to 2,000.
Wow.
And this was an act of war to starve out the native indigenous people of the area. But the repercussions of that are that we have not repopulated the area with bison. We have
Sure.
tried to introduce cattle, which are a non-native species. And in so doing, we from our human mind have ignored that cattle have not evolved with this ecosystem for millions of years. We come in and we're like, cow looks like a bison, so it'll go there and, whatever. We're not thinking like, wait, the bison evolved for 2 million years with this ecosystem. They are
Sure.
the gardeners and the caretakers of this ecosystem. And I don't want to, get too much into it, but for example, everything from the shape of their hooves to the fact that bison have those woolly front legs where they distribute seeds, get stuck in there, they distribute seeds. They do this characteristic called wallowing, where they create literal garden beds with their backs in the soil. So when the rain falls, the seeds that they've dispersed can germinate because the water collects in
Wow.
those little puddles, right? I mean, this is brilliant. Nature is
Yeah,
brilliant.
absolutely.
You put a cow there. Okay, cows' hoofs compact the soil. They don't have those woolly front legs and they don't wallow. And it goes on. But just to give you an idea of
Sure.
how we're missing this abundance. So that ecosystem has dried up. The soil has become compacted. And to make this very relevant to us, I mean, there's literally so many positives to restoring the bison herds,
Sure.
both just roaming and for a food source. But the thing is that when we really look at it, we are missing this giant carbon sponge,
Sure.
which is what we're needing. We're needing
Yeah.
some massive carbon sponges. And the thing is that we know plants sequester the most carbon in these small bacteria, these mycorrhiza that live on the root systems of the plants.
Sure.
So is this kind of giving you an idea of the
Yeah.
magnitude of this keystone species? And I mean, I could go on, and I made a documentary about it, right?
Sure.
So like,
No,
you
no, that's
know,
perfectly understandable. And I have to ask, because you mentioned living in Hawaii, what brought you to a subject matter in the plains of here of the central United States? You know what I mean?
well, I grew up in Iowa. And
Okay.
yes,
Well,
and
I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, so
no, we were neighbors. Q.
I know,
It's
right?
been meant to, it's been destined. It's been destined this whole time. And this is the interesting thing. I was super blessed that I grew up from birth till 12 in an oak wood forest. This
Oh,
beautiful oak wood forest with little rivers and ravines and creeks and nooks and crannies and salamanders and all the things. And from a young age, I had a very strong relationship to nature.
sure.
And as my scope zoomed out, I realized that I was living in a very small percentage of natural ecosystem that is left in Iowa. The
Wow.
majority, like 98% of the state, is GMO corn.
Sure.
And so it led me to drive through the countryside and find these little pockets of nature. And so the story is very, hits my heart
Yeah.
because I see that, and we go into this in the documentary, the problem is the cattle industry is highly dependent upon GMO corn.
Sure.
Most of the corn we raise in this country goes to feed cattle.
Absolutely.
And the issue with that is the way we're farming corn is highly nutrient sucking. Okay.
Sure.
So we have lost half of the topsoil in Iowa in the last 80 to 100 years.
Wow.
This topsoil was left from a glacial deposit. So it's not like someone's going to come with dump
Oh,
trucks
it'll
and
just
dump
come back.
it'll just come back. No, this is the food. This is the soil that will feed our children.
Sure.
And it's blowing away in the wind, right?
It
And
it's wild. I will say that that's one of the things that kind of struck me about your film was that it really is a fascinating thing when you look at the ecosystem on a very like macro level. You start to realize that there's all of these intricacies that depend on each other. It's just kind of, I feel like your film is kind of like how it's very popular, and with rightly so, it's very popular knowledge that, the honeybee issue, right? Like that without honeybees, then we don't have bees pollinating plants, and without that, they die. And it's this thing. But what people don't realize is that is actually true for many of these keystone species, like you're talking about. Like it's not just, if we save the bees, then the planet's fine. It's like, no, there's these other things that we need to think about and worry about and do something about. And I find that
yes,
fascinating. That was totally enlightening to me, I will say.
that's beautiful because what I see is it's not just investing in the planet, it's looking at these systems and saying, if we plug in here, like bison, we get an exponential benefit. Okay.
Right.
We get water filtration, we get carbon sequestering, we get a food source, right?
Sure.
Like I see Elon Musk has some kind of contest right now, sorry, and he's wanting people to build machines to to sequester carbon, and I'm thinking, like, why are we building a machine? We have bison,
Right. We
right?
have natural
We
machines that
have
do it.
natural, and we can eat them, like,
Sure.
and they make themselves, like,
Right, exactly.
mind blown, right?
Sure.
But there is this human need that some of us have, that, like, we want to be superior to nature, I feel, and to
Sure.
not get too much into that, but we want to control it, right? And we can look at all of these systems instead of saying, why don't we observe nature, see
Sure.
what nature's doing, and enhance the
Yeah.
abundance, enhance it, increase it. And, just tying Hawaii back in, the native Hawaiians were actually had this beautiful system called the Ahupua'a system, where they did resource management, kind of like took the islands that are, roundish, and took like
Sure.
kind of slices of the pie, and then
Sure.
they managed resources be in that area. And so you were responsible for, having your fish ponds and feeding your fish sweet potato. You couldn't deplete those resources because there was nowhere else to go, right?
Right. Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. No, I think that is. I have to ask too, because your topic specifically, speaks to kind of this Midwest region, and it involves farmers. And obviously we have tons of cattle here in the Midwest. Did you how was your reception amongst that crowd regarding this film, or how have you felt that it has been?
Well, jury is out, but
Sure.
the thing is, I don't focus. I don't think there's anything innately wrong with the cattle industry,
Sure.
that they're out to do something malicious or bad. I don't think that's the thing. I think what happened is we do what's natural for us. And so
Sure.
when colonists came, they were used to eating cattle. That's what's indigenous to Eurasia. So that's what they brought here to breed, right? And so
Right.
that was what they were. We all know how sensitive we are to our food and what we eat, right? And so, um, they looked at that as the food source, but where we're at now is different than we were 150 years ago. The population on the planet that we need to support, right, is different.
Sure.
And so we all need to start expanding what we're comfortable with And
Sure.
I would say, like, there's a lot of cattle, grass-fed cattle where I live in Northern California now.
Sure.
And one of them just started buying a bison herd. It's not actually the best environment because it's a little bit too wet here for them, but other story. But
Sure.
where you are in Colorado, these areas, I would say, start looking at the benefits of bison. Actually, the
Sure.
return is incredible. Start expanding your awareness. Look at what would it take to start converting my cattle head over to bison, you know?
Sure. I
Yeah.
I love that. I think that's a great message. I will say that if people aren't encouraged by this conversation to check your film out, then I don't know what'll do it. Because I think this is fascinating. I could literally talk about this for hours with you. And if people want that same experience, they should check out your film Keystone, playing at the Lions Film Festival. Maggie, I have to ask, where can people find more about you and about the film outside of Lions Film Fest?
Yes. So we're on Instagram and Facebook as Keystone underscore bison.
Okay,
And also the website, which is keystone-bison.org.
perfect.
Yeah.
Excellent. You heard that. Go check out this film. Go learn about Keystone species. This is a big deal, guys. We only got one planet and one shot, right? So let's start thinking about other options. Maggie, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. And nerds, we'll be back with more interviews from the Lions Film Festival. We'll see you next time.